Hello everyone and welcome back to Healing Motherhood. So, if you are new here, my name is Ashley and I am a mom of 3 boys and I am shooting this video on my phone. Probably going to get interrupted by my 3 kids at some point. My dog is making noise. As you can tell by the title of this video, this is going to be about healing our inner child. And I wanted to kind of give you guys an introduction to this. I can't really go super deep into this subject because it's like a really deep subject. Excuse me, I have banana in my mouth. I was just eating. But if you are new here, my name is Ashley again. I'm a self-love advocate and I have suffered my entire adult life with anxiety and depression. I originally made this channel that I am speaking to you from to document my life as a mom, but I have since changed it to a channel where I share things that have helped me on my mental health healing journey and my journey to self-love and self-acceptance. And a big part of that journey has been healing my inner child. And if you've never heard of that before, I kind of wanted to give you guys an explanation of what that means and kind of like tell you guys about it, I guess. So your inner child is your subconscious mind. So we all are a product of our life, basically. Our subconscious mind is 95% of us. So basically it's our patterns and our behavior and basically where your personality comes from. And then we have a conscious mind, which is 5% of our entire being. So 95% is subconscious, meaning it's not in your conscious awareness. Excuse me. I just drank kombucha, so I'm burping. So your conscious mind is the logical, rational, and analytical part of your mind, the part that we control, the part that we're, thinking little thoughts in our head. And our subconscious mind, like I said, is the basically unconscious programming. So your inner child is your subconscious mind. Our subconscious mind is the part of us that is responsible for our reactions, our personality, our mental health, and a multitude of other things. But I wanted to talk about inner child work particularly because it's something that I have done myself and I actually kind of just stumbled upon it. And I'm going to kind of get into how I stumbled upon it. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background on what childhood trauma is, how it is defined, I guess. And I wanted to give you guys a couple of references because when I first started out like trying to get better from my mental health issues, the first discovery that I had about my own issues, I guess, was in high school. I think I was Googling like what causes depression or what causes anxiety. And back in the day, I kind of used it as a way to kind of blame my parents and kind of justify all of my anger and angst. And I kind of just understood that your childhood is what causes you to be the way you are. I got that whole thing, but I was still very stuck in anger and blame and victimhood. So I kind of just was like, this is what's wrong with me and this is why, it didn't really go any farther than that. And then in my adult life, after I had, I ended up going to therapy because I was just suffering so much in my life. I had 3 kids, little kids, and I suffered from postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. And I went to therapy and I did all the things you're supposed to do, but I really just wasn't making very much headway in changing what was wrong with me and what was really disturbing me. I also suffered for years with like addiction issues. And I wanted to kind of delve into what addiction is as well. I've actually been, for years, I've listened to the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. But recently I have just stumbled back upon his work and I've been listening to like a bunch of podcasts. Obviously we're all in quarantine right now. And his work on, he's a Canadian physician who was born in Budapest, Hungary during World War II. He was traumatized in his childhood by just being in that sort of family environment. Obviously, it's very traumatic. He became a physician, and then eventually he got interested in childhood development and childhood trauma and how it really affects people with addictions and mental health problems. And his work is just really interesting and amazing. And I've always been super interested in psychology, just because I guess I've always been so like psychologically disturbed. I shouldn't laugh about that, but I really have. So I've spent the last like 3 years, if you don't know who I am, I've spent the last 2 or 3 years on a really deep journey of healing and changing behavior and changing and reprogramming my subconscious mind. And I've wanted to share all that information with you on this channel. I just haven't really figured out how. So I just thought this would be a really good way to start. So yeah. So like I said, your subconscious mind is 95% of your being, basically. And Gabor Mate defines trauma as he has a quote that says, "Trauma is not what happens to us, it is what happens inside of us." So we all, from 0 to 8, are in a brainwave pattern of basically being programmed. So anything that happens to you from ages 0 to 8 that is in any way psychologically traumatizing, emotionally traumatizing, physically traumatizing, in any way traumatizing, goes into our subconscious mind and stays there if it isn't reconciled, basically, or if it isn't explained, or if it isn't challenged by anyone in our environment. And most people have some sort of childhood trauma, especially if you find yourself suffering from an addiction, suffering from any kind of mental health issue. You most likely have some sort of trauma. And actually, ironically, right now we are all suffering a collective trauma, which is actually really why I wanted to make this video. Obviously, with the whole like pandemic thing is what I'm talking about. So, like I said, he says trauma is not what happens to us, it is what happens inside of us. So from 0 to 8, our subconscious mind is programmed. And when you're a child, you have a very narcissistic view on the world. So anything that happens to you as a child goes in, and the conclusions that you come to as a child stay there and are basically then, as you get older, become your subconscious programming. And in my childhood in particular, I'm kind of going to go into my personal story a little bit in this, just to kind of give you an example of how I've used this information to kind of like enlighten my whole view of my life and really like try to heal and integrate my own trauma. When I was young, my parents were drug addicts, to just put it plainly. I have no resentment. I have forgiven everyone in this situation. That's why I feel free to talk about it. And if any of this is triggering, I apologize. My parents were drug addicts. From 0 to 3, I was raised by my grandparents, and they were amazing, sweet, supportive, everything that I needed. But when I was 3, my father decided to get remarried to a woman who was less than ideal, and she was traumatized and abused herself, and as was my father. And the situation that I was put into was basically very traumatic for me. Isn't one of my kids trying to get in here? Sorry, guys. So I had a lot of repressed, pushed down trauma, and I was not really aware of most of it. Most of it was completely blacked out. I still am kind of unraveling it, to be honest with you. But due to all of those things that happened to me, I ended up as a very angsty, very angry, very depressed, very anxious teenager and subsequently adult. And without really understanding my psychological issues, I just continued to live as we all do. And I just was basically, my life was guided by my trauma, as most people are. And I suffered from addiction, and maybe not in the traditional sense. I was never like a completely, like, I wasn't a heroin addict or anything. But another thing, I love Gabor Mate. I don't know if I really, yeah, I did explain who he was. Sorry guys, I've filmed this video a couple times. My kids kept interrupting me. This is gonna be a one take. So Gabor Mate defines an addiction as addiction. This is a quote. Addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person craves or finds temporary relief in that causes negative consequences in the future that someone will not give up. So basically anything can be an addiction. And an addiction is a way to solve an emotional pain or an emotional trauma. One thing I really love about Dr. Gabor Mate, I'm going to put some like videos of his down below. He wrote a bunch of amazing books. One thing I really love about him is he talks about addicted people, and he worked with like the most addicted people in Canada, people who were shooting up heroin, people who were like severe drug addicts. He talks about drug addicts are not people who should be blamed for what is going on within them, including anyone who is addicted to anything should not be blamed or shamed or re-traumatized for their addiction. And that's something that I just love about him, because it's so true. But so within myself, I self-medicated as a teenager. The first time I could drink, I drank. The first time I could do drugs, I did drugs. I never got, thankfully, very deep into that. But over the years, I have medicated with food. I have medicated with just shopping. Anything that you do that makes you feel relief, that may have a negative consequence in the future that you cannot give up, is an addiction. So I was using a multitude of things to try and relieve myself from emotional pain. And I did not realize that probably until like a few years ago. Excuse me. So why am I talking about that? So how all of this has to do with inner child work is we are all at the core of us, within our subconscious mind, a product of what happened to us, whether it was actually something that from the outside seemed traumatic. We are all a product of our inner turmoil or our inner emotions. So I personally had a lot of inner turmoil, and without realizing completely. So the way my anxiety and depression affected my daily life is when I would wake up in the morning every single day, I would have crippling anxiety, and that anxiety was this very dark anger and frustration. And for my entire adult life, I have kept everyone that I love at an arm's distance. And I didn't really realize that I was doing this. Every relationship that I had, I was a serial monogamist. I was never alone. In my adult life, I went from boyfriend to boyfriend to boyfriend to boyfriend until I found my husband. We got married. I always felt the need to become a mother. Later on, I kind of can look back and see like my behavior as really just really grasping for anything to make myself feel worthy and deserving and of my own acceptance and love. I was very good at self-hatred, and a lot of my anxiety caused me to be a very angry, frustrated wife and mother. Hold on one second. So basically my own personal anxiety and depression and anger was also stemming and causing a lot of guilt and shame. And I was just in a desperate state to try and escape myself. My entire adult life, I was in a desperate state to escape myself. I was constantly feeling as if I was not enough. I wasn't a good enough mom, I wasn't a good enough wife, I wasn't a good enough daughter, I wasn't a good enough whatever person, wasn't skinny enough, wasn't pretty enough, whatever it was. And all of that was from my childhood trauma. As children, we have a very narcissistic view on the world. We believe, like, I don't know if, I'm sure people have heard of when your parents divorce or when your parents are fighting, you as a child, or children in general, tend to think that that is their fault. And if there is no one there to say it's not your fault, or which is, most of the time parents are very concerned with what's going on with themselves, to no fault of their own. And for generations and generations and generations, there's been trauma passed along from your grandparents and their grandparents and their parents and their parents. And as a society and as humanity, we are all evolving to become more aware of our own sensitivities and our own emotions. And I think now more than ever, thanks to work like done by people like Gabor Mate, we're realizing that these traumatizations that have happened to us are not our fault. And we're able to kind of look back on what happened to us, and kind of review it with the perspective of an adult. And so I kind of got into what I like to call reparenting myself. When I first started to meditate, I started to realize my own thoughts. And I started to realize that the thoughts that I was thinking were, I'd say 90% of them extremely negative, extremely self-loathing, extremely self-hating. And when I found that out, first of all, I was completely disturbed and I thought there was something severely wrong with me. And then I started looking into it and I started reading a million self-help books, watching a bunch of videos. I was going to therapy, and I really found out that all of the thoughts that were coming out and coming into my conscious mind were from my subconscious mind, from the conclusions that I had as a child. And I realized that I have the ability to give myself a new perspective, first of all, and look at myself as an adult and from an adult perspective, and kind of speak to that inner wounded child part of me and kind of give myself a break. I had been putting these super high standards, and I know a lot of moms can relate to this. When you're a mom, you feel like you have this like standard for who you want to be, and then there's like who you're able to be. And especially if you had childhood trauma, this is who you're able to be, and you are looking at this like unrealistic view of like this perfect mom that really doesn't exist, FYI. And I was putting myself down, hating myself for it. And the self-hatred and the self-deprecating thoughts that I was thinking was causing this severe anxiety and severe depression. And just being aware of that is like half the battle. So I'm not saying that cured me, but I did have a lot of transformative moments. I had one in particular where I had woken up and I was in my normal, like angry, anxious state. I think I fought with my husband, and I was crying in the bathroom, and I had this realization of it was not my fault. Like, it was no fault of my own that I started to feel the way I was feeling. And it was also no fault of anyone around me. I spent a lot of years being very angry at my father, for putting me into the situation that he put me in. And now as an adult, I can look at his life and see his trauma and see what happened to him as a child that caused him to have these patterns of just things that re-traumatized. He passed his trauma to me. My mom passed her trauma to me of no fault of them. And being able to forgive them. Hold on, my son. My phone's gonna die. So basically, I had this realization that it was not my fault. And after really discovering all of this information by Dr. Gabor Mate and all of the information about your subconscious mind, and really that you're just a bunch of patterns, it opened this door up to me being able to observe my own behavior and then try to actually make changes and really just make headway in healing myself and really like acknowledging my own pain and sitting with my own pain and not trying to escape myself so much. So yeah, I think this is where I'm going to end this video. I hope this information was helpful. And if you guys have any questions down below, or have any ideas of what you really want me to touch on, I guess, in my next video, let me know. But I definitely will be making another video about this. I hope this has been helpful. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.